For the next part of this, we're going to go back and do some of the hypothesis tests that were in the first 11 problems. First, we're going to go back to problem number 1. So we're going to take the data from this problem and actually run the hypothesis test in StatCrunch. For this one, we decided that this was a proportion one sample test. So I'm using proportion stats, one sample with summary. Since we don't have a list of data, we just have the summary data. In this case, we had 297 that favored the Republican candidate out of a total of 400. Our number of successes is the 297, and then our number of observations, that's the sample size, would be 400. We're doing a hypothesis test, and we want to use the 0.70 for p, and our alternative hypothesis had a greater than. Remember, when you're doing this in StatCrunch, you don't ever put in the significance level into StatCrunch. So now I'm clicking on compute, and here are my results. My test statistic is right here, so it's 1.85. My p-value is 0.0318. In this one, it asked us to test at a 0.05 significance level, so we're comparing the p-value to that significance level. The p-value is less than 0.05. That means we have a positive conclusion. So there is sufficient evidence to support the claim, which was that union support for the Republican candidate is over 70%. For number 13, we're running the test in problem number 2. This was a T1 sample test, so we're going to use the T-stats in StatCrunch. So here's my T-stats. This was just a one sample with summary. You want to make sure that what it's asking you for in StatCrunch fits the information that you have. In this one, they have the sample of 45 chicken eggs, so there's our sample size. It gave us the sample mean was 209 and the sample standard deviation. And those are exactly the three things that StatCrunch is asking for. So we have 209 for our sample mean, 15.9 for our sample standard deviation, and the sample size was 45. Then here's our hypotheses. So we're putting 213 in for the number. We're leaving the inequality as a not equal to. And here are our results. So our test statistic is negative 1.69. Our p-value is 0.0986. We were supposed to test this at a 0.05 significance level. This time the p-value is bigger than the significance level, which means we get negative conclusions. There is not sufficient evidence to support the claim, and that was that the average cholesterol content in a chicken egg is different than 213. For number 15, we're going back to the information in problem number 8. This is the one where we had the test about the two means. So this was a T2 sample test. In StatCrunch, we're going to do T-stats 2 sample with summary. So it's asking us for two sets of information, the sample mean, standard deviation, and sample size for each of our two samples. And we want to put this in the same order that we had it in the problem. The first set was for the 20 to 24-year-old drivers. So we're putting in the mean and the standard deviation, and the sample size is 40. And then for the second set, for the 30 to 59-year-old drivers, we have a mean, a standard deviation, and a sample size. And then the only thing we need to change in our hypotheses is the inequality. We get these results. Test statistic is 1.82. Our p-value is 0.0366. This time there was a 0.01 significance level. If we look at our p-value is actually bigger than our significance level, which means we get a negative conclusion. So there's not sufficient evidence to support the claim that the average claim amounts for the younger drivers was higher than that for the older drivers. In the next one, we're looking at problem 9. This was the one about the bed nets for the infants. So this was a proportion 2 sample test. So we have proportions 2 sample with summary. For this one, we need to put in the number of successes and the sample size for each of our 2 samples. Again, I'm doing this in the order that it comes in the problem. So the first set of infants we have is the ones that did use the bed nets. So we had 21 successes out of 301. For the second set, it was 26 out of 272. And then our inequality had a less than, so I'm changing that to a less than, and we've got our results. So our test statistic is a negative 1.12. Our p-value is 0.1303. If we have a 0.05 significance level, our p-value is greater than our significance level. That means we have a negative conclusion. There is not sufficient evidence to support the claim. And last of all, for problem 11, we're going to go back and run this test. In this one, we had the data, so we actually need to copy and paste this into StatCrunch. When you're taking your exam, hopefully it will work for you to just open the data set in StatCrunch. If not, you can always copy and paste it like I'm going to do right now. So I'm just copying this. The only thing you really have to be careful of if you're copying and pasting into StatCrunch is that if you've got the column headers, you have to start with the column header row like this. Here's my data after I copied and pasted it into StatCrunch. What we're doing for this is a t-paired test. So I'm doing t-stats paired. The data that came first in the problem was the store. Second was the competitor, so that's the way I'm putting it in here. And then our inequality was a less than. There are my results. My test statistic is negative 1.06. My p-value is 0.1578. So at a 5% significance level, that's the same as 0.05, my p-value is much bigger than my significance level. That means I have negative results. There's not sufficient evidence to support the claim that the store's prices are lower on the average than their competitors.